Morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Morning, good morning. All right, thanks for joining me. It's nice to see everyone. Nice to be together.
Morning.
Good morning. Wanted to just mention and mark that today is Kristallnacht. That 82 years ago in Germany, this was a massive pogrom throughout the country, known as the Night of Broken Glass. And I know that when I visited Germany already 9 years ago, I visited many synagogues and storefronts that were destroyed and attacked on Kristallnacht, which really is sort of the formal beginning of the Holocaust, or sort of the bringing the attention to the world. And can everyone hear me? And not that today, recalling Kristallnacht is a very important moment for us to remember as we recall the Shoah, as we see the continued rise in anti-Semitism today, but also as hope. I mentioned that this morning at Minyan, but yesterday I had the pleasure of participating in a bris, and bris was the birth of another generation from Holocaust survivors. And in fact, the baby is named for a survivor who recently passed away, and carrying on that legacy. And in our own congregation, another actually survivor family gave birth to a baby this past weekend. So we have another bris later this week for another survivor family. So as we recall Kristallnacht and the horrors of the Shoah, we also recall and celebrate the survivors that amazingly survived and continued tradition. And actually, maybe one day I'll try to get my friend who is the Rabbi Gisa Ederberg. She's the rabbi at the Orangestrasse Synagogue in Berlin, which was one of the synagogues which were attacked during Kristallnacht. And maybe we can have a conversation with her about Jewish life in Germany today, and also in the ashes of the Holocaust. So just wanted to mark that. But today I wanted to dedicate my session in memory of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and to spend our time this morning reading some of his work, studying some of his work. Rabbi Sacks, I'm sure that you've all heard him, studied with him, learned with him, studied through our clergy or other classes that you've taken. If I am studying the Parsha, preparing for one of my own remarks or something that I'm bringing to the congregation, Rabbi Sacks is one of the three texts, one of the three rabbis, one of the three sources that I always go to look for my own personal inspiration and to help me frame my own words. So it's a real, true, deep loss. The Rabbi Sacks passed away. You probably heard he died on Shabbat. And the funeral, I think, is today in London. They're going to broadcast the eulogies if they haven't yet already. So what I wanted to do is take a look at the first book that sort of introduced me to Rabbi Sacks. He's written many, many books, many amazing books. And in fact, he just released a new book just a few months ago called Morality, which I highly recommend. In my lead up to preparing for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I always sort of read several of the current books that get published prior to the holidays, and not all of them make them into my sermons. But I definitely read Rabbi Sacks's Morality, which I really can, I can't do enough to recommend it to you. It didn't make it word for word. There were no quotes in my sermons from that book, but his writing, his teaching, his views sort of made their way into what I said. In particular, he talked about, it's a bit of a philosophical and political history of the deep divisions that exist in our world right now, how that came to be, and sort of what his vision is for how we can bridge past that. So that's my recommendation for the book Morality. He's also had several sort of leading up earlier at the end of the summer, he had several long interviews that you can find online, YouTube videos, where he discussed the recent publication of the book. So if you don't want to necessarily pick up the book and read it, I recommend searching for some of those interviews and listening to them. So having said that, I actually wanted to go and do some reading for, if you can see, this was my first introduction to him. Well, I'll show it to you later online so you can see, but it's probably backwards and everything else. Half Price Books, got a long time ago. It's called To Heal a Fractured World. Published in 2005, To Heal a Fractured World. And I remember the first time I read it, I was flying somewhere. I don't remember if it was the West Coast or to Israel, but I sort of opened up his book. And then for the next, whether it was a 3-hour flight or whether it was a 11-hour flight, I just read the book, or read as much as I could read in that time period. And I was so engaged, and he spoke to me, spoke to our world. To Heal a Fractured World, this was sort of written post 9/11. And that was sort of the spur for that book. And as I said, his most current book, Morality, sort of talks about everything that's happening in our world today. But I think that book, To Heal a Fractured World, sort of speaks to us still today. So without further ado, I'm going to hopefully share some. And let me get a couple of readers, and I wanted to just read some snippets from it. Hopefully, I also bought it on Kindle, so hopefully we can do Kindle on my screen. That's my hope and my prayer. Let me take a couple reading volunteers, and if you're okay with it, I'll sort of call upon you. Anyone want to? You can just raise your. I can see all of you. So if you want to read, you can raise your hand. Margie, anyone else? Gina, Bill. Okay, that's a good start, and then we'll see. And I also wanted to, if we have time, listen to. I don't know if this is his last recording, but up until this week, Rabbi Sacks records his weekly Parsha commentary, which is put out on his website and several other websites. You can find his weekly Parsha everywhere, but he also records it. And there's nothing like hearing Rabbi Sacks share his own words. So I'm going to sort of stop us at some point. It's about, I think, 6 minutes or 8 minutes long. So if you can make it till 11, we're going to cut it off. And I want to end with actually listening to him speak about last week's Parsha, but actually encapsulate everything that he believes in and everything that he taught us. Okay? All right. So Margie, you are a first reader offer. So if you want to unmute yourself and let me pull up, and hopefully the screen share is going to work. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
You can see the book?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't see all of the, wait, let me move this.
Now you're going to have to move us. I know. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
You're going to have to keep moving us around. So yeah, this is from the book To Heal a Fractured World, The Ethics of Responsibility. And I'm going to sort of, in 45 minutes, we're going to make our way through a really heavy and dense book and hopefully have a little discussion also. Okay, so if you see my cursor, if you can pick up and start one of Judaism's most distinctive.
Sure. One of Judaism's most distinctive and challenging ideas is its ethics of responsibility. The idea that God invites us to become, in the rabbinic phrase, his partners in the work of creation. The God who created the world in love calls on us to create in love. The God who gave us the gift of freedom asks us to use it to honor and enhance the freedom of others. God, the ultimate other, asks us to reach out to the human other. More than God is a strategic intervener, he's a teacher. More than he does our will, he teaches us how to do his. Life is God's call to responsibility. That is the theme of this book. More than any previous generation in history, we have come to see the individual as the sole source of meaning. The gossamer filaments of connection between us and others that once held together families, communities, and societies have become attenuated. We have become lonely selves in search of purely personal fulfillment. But that surely must be wrong. Life alone is only half a life. One spent pursuing the satisfaction of desire is less than satisfying and never all we desire. So it is worth reminding ourselves that there is such a thing as ethics, and it belongs to the life we live together and the goods we share, the goods that only exist in virtue of being shared. That is one of Judaism. No.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the other page. People are welcome to unmute yourselves now. I can't see all of you right now because we're looking at the shared page. But to me, this is his opening of the whole book, the introduction. But to me, it really speaks out, right? More than God is a strategic intervener, God is a teacher. More than God does our world, God teaches us how to do God's. Life is God's call to responsibility. And this idea of life alone is only half a life. That sort of spoke to me, sort of everything that's going on right now. Obviously, he wrote this in a different climate, in a different place, but this idea of shared responsibility. Any thoughts before we continue a little bit more in the intro?
I'm kind of struck about kind of the casual, I mean, he's saying very deep things, but the tone is very casual. God is personified as, like someone we walk into the shul and see there as a teacher and just kind of sit down with him and kind of go through this stuff. There's a inference that I take that of us being equal to God and doing God's work. Do you agree, or do you? I mean, it just strikes me as it's just great. It has a kind of a casual tone to it.
Yeah, right. This is not the God in a throne on a cloud, right? Casting judgment upon us, or punishment or reward, right? This is a God that we're in conversation with. Yeah. Any other comments? I'm going to put it back on the share screen, and Margie will just read a little. Let me move the page. So let me get to the right page. I'm just moving us through a little bit. We're jumping a little, so I apologize. I gotta just find my book is different than the Kindle version, so just gotta find that. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Can you see, Margie? When the disciples of the great Talmudist.
Yes. When the disciples of the greatest Talmudist of the late 19th century, Rabbi Hal A of Brisk, asked him to define the task of a rabbi, he replied, to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone, to protect the dignity of the poor, and to save the oppressed from the hands of his oppressor. Constantly in debt, he gave most of his salary to the poor. In the winter, he would leave his wood store unlocked so the poor of the town could take the fuel they needed without the embarrassment of having to ask. When the lay leaders of the town complained that this was costing them money, he replied that he was saving them medical expenses, since otherwise he would be forced to sit in the cold and catch pneumonia. It was impossible, he said, for him to light a fire in his own home if he knew that in other homes, the poor were freezing. Judaism is a complex and subtle faith, yet it has rarely lost touch with its simple ethical imperatives. We are here to make a difference, to mend the fractures of the world a day at a time and act at a time, for as long as it takes to make it a place of justice and compassion where the lonely are not alone, the poor not without help, where the cry of the vulnerable is heeded and those who are wronged are heard. Someone else's physical needs are my spiritual obligation, a Jewish mystic taught. The truths of religion are exalted, but its duties are close at hand. We know God less by contemplation than by emulation. The choice is not between faith and deeds, for it is by our deeds that we express our faith and make it real in the life of others and the world. Jewish ethics is refreshingly down to earth. If someone is in need, give. If someone is lonely, invite them home. If someone you know has recently been bereaved, visit them and give them comfort. If you know of someone who has lost their job, do all you can to help them find another. The sages called this imitating God. They went further. Giving hospitality to a stranger, they said, is even greater than receiving the divine presence. That is religion at its most humanizing and humane. So too is its insistence that the ethical life is a form of celebration. Doing good is not painful, a matter of dour duty and a chastising conscience. There's a Hebrew word, a key term of the Bible, for which there is no precise English translation. Simcha, usually translated as joy. What it really means is the happiness we share, or better still, the happiness we make by sharing. One of the greatest statements of individual dignity and responsibility. Judaism is also an intensely communal faith, not simply a matter of the lonely soul in search of God. Plotinus says the flight of the alone to the alone. It is about sharing what we have, seeing possessions less as things we own than things we hold in trust, one of the conditions of which is that we use part of what we have to help others. That is not self-sacrifice. If there's one thing I have heard more often than any other from those who spend part of their time in service to others, it is that they gain more than they give. They do not want to be thanked. They want to thank. Lifting others, they find that they themselves have been lifted.
Just the first sentence of the next paragraph.
The ethic of responsibility is the best answer I know to the meaning and meaningfulness of a life.
Okay, so this is how he opens the book, and obviously gets very deep. He's going to go through all different biblical stories where he sees this idea of responsibility and taking responsibility. And actually, we're going to end that way because that actually was the last recorded Devar Torah that he gave on last week's Torah portion, which again, we're going to end with in his own language. Any other thought, any comments, reactions to this introduction? I agree, Chair, this is really down to earth. Rabbi Sacks wasn't always so down to earth. But, you know, again, this was my introduction to him and really sort of putting it out plain, right? That the word simcha, joy, is about sharing what we have with others, right? Not some like personal happy dance we're doing behind closed doors, right? Simcha is when we can share with others, and that gives us so much joy. Anything else pop out from what Margie read for us?
I like where he says that it's a religion of like doing. It's not just about faith or praying. You don't have to worry if you're davening at certain times, but it's the mitzvah of helping others, or if someone's grieving, visiting with them, or somebody needs something, doing it. It made it, you know, something we could all do and all aspire to do as often as we can. It's not just high up there, you know, everyone can do it.
Well, that speaks to Rabbi Sacks. I didn't really go into this or not, right? He is an Orthodox rabbi, right? Very traditional and very learned. And, you know, he could speak on the highest academic level and obviously, you know, so learned in Jewish classic texts. And, you know, as you saw, he's already, you know, quoting Plotinus, right? He has a very just a deep classical, you know, classical literature and classical philosophy background. I don't think it says it here, but he actually was studying philosophy in England. That was what he was doing undergraduate when he sort of changed course and decided to become a rabbi. Right, but he's not saying, right, that all Judaism is bound up in halakha and keeping the strictest laws. Exactly. Any other comments, thoughts?
What makes these ethics Jewish ethics as opposed to just ethics?
It's a good question. It's a great question, right? I mean, well, that's what the book is going to say, right? So he's going to go through all the major stories of the Torah, that's why I'm going to recommend the book. We can't do the whole book in an hour or 45 minutes. So he's going to show that this is, that the core of Judaism is these ethics. I don't know if he would necessarily say that this isn't sort of for everyone. You know, again, one of the immense hallmark of Rabbi Sacks and sort of his greatness was that he spoke to the world. He was a Jewish voice, though, that spoke for the world. You know, he wasn't just about Jews. Obviously, he stood for Jews. He was an incredible rabbi. I mean, he was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom first, right? So, and he was a synagogue, he was a pulpit rabbi also at some point in his life. But he became sort of like, you know, on the level of Dalai Lama or, you know, like world thinker, you know, Pope, right? You know, if we were in a difficult time and just wanted a statement of what religion, you know, religion per se religion is, Rabbi Sacks would speak from Jewish tradition, but applicable to all. I know I didn't directly answer your question, but that's sort of my thought. Lita.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that his word is going down to the youngest generation, because I do have dialogue with my son in Memphis and his family. And the first thing my son said to me was, "Did you hear about Rabbi Sacks?" And my 11-year-old grandson in the background said, "Rabbi Sacks?" And I thought he thought we were talking about some Rabbi Sacks he knew. "Rabbi Sacks died?" And he said, "Oh, that is so sad." And I said, "Well, how do you know Rabbi Sacks?" And he said, "My teacher talks about what he taught all the time." So that made me feel really good that this word is going down to our youngest generation right now. That was so nice.
Yeah, well,
Well, he does go to Jewish day school.
Thankfully, Rabbi Sacks has published a lot of books, and he has a really active archive of website that has not only the recordings of him reading his teachings, but also about 20 years worth of his Divrei Torah from each parsha. So if you want to see 20 years worth of commentary from Rabbi Sacks on each Torah portion, just go to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and he has an amazing website with great videos. So I want to sort of jump and just look sort of some of the last pages. Again, we're missing that whole middle chunk. So my apologies to Rabbi Sacks of blessed memory. But just sort of wanted to give you an opening to Rabbi Sacks. So Bill, I know you are one of the readers. I got to sort of try to find the spot though where actually I should do this. Table of contents. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can see we're skipping faith as protest, charity as justice, love as deeds, sanctifying the name, mending the world, a single soul, kindness to strangers, responsibility for society, right? These are all sort of key stories, core stories from the Torah, right? Where he learns the ethics of responsibility for the world from, right? Birth of responsibility, holy and the good, monotheistic imagination, faith in God, redeeming evil, right? The chaos theory of virtue, right? I'm gonna take a look at, we're gonna look at just a little bit of the second to last chapter, and we're gonna sort of zoom in on his last chapter. Okay, Bill, if you'll read.
Sure. Moses, when I die and go to the world to come, they will not ask me, Zuzia, why were you not Moses? They will ask me, Zuzia, why were you not Zuzah, Rabbi Zuzah of Hannibal? Moses' second question to God at the burning bush was, who are you? His first was, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He did not stop there. He said, Lord, I am not a man of words, neither in the past nor now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. I find it extraordinary that the greatest Jewish leader of all time thought he was inadequate, not up to the task. Please, he said, send someone else. Nor was this true of Moses alone. Isaiah, when charged with his mission, said, I am a man of unclean lips. Jeremiah said, I cannot speak, for I am a child. Jonah tried to run away. According to one commentator, That is what Jacob was doing when he found his way blocked by the man angel with whom he wrestled at night. Twice, David, Israel's greatest king, echoed Moses' words, "Who am I?" These were not figures possessed of a sense of destiny, determined from an early age to achieve fame. They doubted their own abilities. There were times when they felt like giving up. Moses, Jeremiah, and Jonah reached points of such despair that they prayed to die. They became heroes of the moral life against their will. There was work to be done, God told them so, and they did it. It is almost as if a sense of smallness is a sign of greatness. The first question asked in lectures and books on ethics is usually, why be moral? As if the greatest roadblock on the way were selfishness, egocentricity, indifference. I suspect, however, that the real question is, why me? Who am I to do the noble deed, the courageous act? I am just an ordinary person, not the kind you read about in books. But the great people, the Lamed Vovitsniks, those who change lives and mend the fractures of the world, just are ordinary persons who think there is nothing special about them and what they do.
We're going to pause here. Can you hear me, Bill?
Yes.
So this is his setup for the chapter, right? If we can summarize, the setup for the chapter is anyone summarize what Bill read from this chapter? Who am I?
Well, it's that we're not born with this destiny, that it's the individual decision of any of us to do the right thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to share next. He tells a personal story here again. He tells different versions of how he became a rabbi and why he became a rabbi. So what's next in the book is, and I thought this was fitting as we remember him today, this is him writing the story, one of the stories of how he became a rabbi. So Bill, I'm going to advance the screen a couple of pages and then ask you to pick up in 1968. Do you see that on the right side?
In 1968, a young man met the then Rebbe of Lubavitch, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, at a center in New York. The visitor was a British university student, halfway through an undergraduate course in philosophy. His studies had raised a number of intellectual questions about religion, and he wanted to find thoughtful people with whom to discuss them. During his summer vacation, he made a trip to America, searching out rabbis whose writings he had read. Throughout his travels, a name kept coming up in conversation. You must meet, he was told, the Rebbe of Lubavitch, one of the great leaders of the Jewish world. He went to the Rebbe Center in Eastern Parkway, Brooklyn, and told one of his followers that he wanted to meet the great man. The Chassid laughed. There are thousands of people who want to see the Rebbe, he said. Every moment of his day is full. The student persisted. He gave the Chassid the phone number of his aunt in Los Angeles. I will be there in 3 weeks' time, he said. If you can arrange a meeting, please let me know. 3 weeks later, a call came through. The Rebbe can see you, the man said, this Thursday evening. The student boarded a Greyhound bus, traveled for 3 days, and arrived in New York. Finally, admitted to the Rebbe's presence, he was surprised. He had assumed that he was about to meet a charismatic leader. Instead, he spoke quietly, unassumingly, as if the most important person in the room were the student. The young man asked his questions. The Rebbe gave replies. Then he did something unexpected. He turned the conversation round. He began asking the student questions. What was he doing to strengthen Jewish life in the university where he was studying? Was he befriending other students and drawing them close? The young man was taken by surprise. He was not a leader. He had never seen himself as one or wanted to be one. He had come to the Rebbe to ask philosophical questions, not to be recruited to be religious staffs. Yet the Rebbe was insistent. He was inviting the British student to get involved, take the initiative, accept responsibility. As he himself put it later, I had.
Sorry.
I had been told that the Rebbe was a man with thousands of followers. After I met him, I understood that the opposite was the case. A good leader creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. More than the Rebbe was a leader, he created leadership in others. The impact of the meeting was not immediate. The student returned home and continued his studies, but the Rebbe's questions continued to echo in his mind. At the time, his intention was to become an economist or a lawyer or an academic, yet he could not rid himself of the feeling that the Rebbe had said something important, personal. Jews were disaffiliating. Fewer and fewer were finding in Judaism intellectual stimulus or ethical inspiration. The Rebbe translated that fact into a challenge, a situation into a call. Things are going wrong. Are you willing to be one of those who helps to put them right? Years later, still troubled by the question, the young man began studying at a religious seminary. Eventually, he became a rabbi, then a teacher of rabbis, then a chief rabbi, then the writer of the words you're reading now. This book is part payment of a debt I incurred to a great Jewish leader many years ago. You don't have to be special to heed the call. All you need is the ability to listen to the poor, the ill, the lonely, the homeless, the neglected, the excluded, the people whose voices go unheard, or to the challenge unmet, the problem unsolved, the things that need doing but remain undone. This is what religious listening is. It is what, in the Bible, God does. He hears the silent sadness of Leah, unloved by Jacob, and gives her a child. He hears the cry of the Israelites in Egypt, broken by slavery, and brings them out to freedom. It is no accident that the greatest Jewish command is Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. The moral life, the life that transforms lives, begins in the ear, in the act of listening.
We're going to pause here. So you can see he shared a bit of his own personal story, right? And he thought he was going to be an economist, an academic, right? A philosopher who was Jewish. And that encounter, right? It's sort of like his own Lech Lecha story, right? He traveled to America and he met the Rebbe after 3 weeks of waiting, right? The Greyhound bus. And right, he expected to get answers. And what did the Rebbe give him? Questions, and maybe even a challenge, perhaps, right? Right, but he had to hear the challenge in it, right? And to take root and to take action of it, right? And from that meeting in 1968 in Brooklyn, right? In the end, that trajectory became, the great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory. Pretty moving story, right? Right. Who do we listen to? Who do we seek audience with? And if we think, if any of us are mentors, and I think about our own sort of role in mentoring people, right? We learn about what it means to be a mentor also, right? Or our parents, I think still working with my kids and, what it means and how much we do for them, how much we challenge them, how much we lay the path for them, how much they have to work for it and sort of find their own way. Any other thoughts? I want to go to just the end of this chapter and then to the last chapter of this book. Any other comments?
No, I was just going to modify a little bit about what I said earlier. In Rabbi Sacks' own story and in the references he gives to the Torah, the first inclination is to say, I'm not up for the task, or to even run from the responsibility of taking on the task. And it kind of permissions us to say that anybody can do this.
100%.
So what do you think the Rebbe's hit rate was? I'm sure he challenged a lot of people. They didn't all become chief rabbis of England. I'm sure some of them were aspired, but I wonder, I'm sure he didn't think of it that way, but if he ever measured success in his mind, like, yeah, I reached 1%, I reached 5%. I don't know. Who knows?
That's an excellent question. I was actually just talking about Telushkin's book, Rebbe, which also is a really fascinating book. I highly recommend it because I'm working with a conversion student that had never really known what Chabad is and what Chabad was, and the idea of sending out the Rebbe's vision of sending out shluchim, rabbis to every sort of part of the world to share the message. So I know that's a discussion for another day, but as you brought it up, just interesting to sort of open someone's eyes to that concept itself. So I want to jump to, Bill, let me just have you read the last chapter. There's only 2 paragraphs to close this chapter. And then I wanted, Gina had offered to read. Do you want to read then, Gina, be the reader after Bill?
Sure.
Okay, so Bill's going to read just the closing of this chapter. Let me find the spot. Yep. Okay. Do you see Immanuel Kant on the right?
Yes.
Okay.
Immanuel Kant famously defined morality as a universal imperative. Act only on a maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Perhaps that is what morality is to the mindset of reason. There surely are universal imperatives. We all know them. Don't murder, don't injure the innocent, don't rob or steal, don't lie. These are the rules we learned as children, and if we failed to learn them, others quickly taught us. The interesting part of the moral life, the grown-up part, comes not in universals, but particulars. It speaks to me, here, now, this person, in this situation, at this time. It knows my name. It calls to me, not to the person next to me. It says, there is an act only you can do, the situation only you can address, a moment that, if not seized, may never come again. God commands in generalities, but calls in particulars. He knows our gifts, and he knows the needs of the world. That is why we are here. There's an act only we can do, and only at this time, and that is our task. The sum of these tasks is the meaning of our life, the purpose of our existence, the story we're called upon to write. God's call is almost inaudible. I translate the biblical phrase, a still small voice, as the voice we can only hear if we are listening. But it is there, and if from time to time throughout our lives, we create a silence in the soul, we will hear it. There is no life without a task, no person without a talent, no place without a fragment of God's light waiting to be discovered and redeemed. No situation without its possibility of sanctification, no moment without its call. It may take a lifetime to learn how to find these things, but once we learn, we realize in retrospect that all it ever took was the ability to listen. When God calls, he does not do so by way of universal imperatives. Instead, he whispers our name. And the greatest reply, the reply of Abraham, is simply Hineni, here I am, ready to heed your call, to mend a fragment of your all too broken world.
Thanks. So this is sort of this is the summary, the conclusion of that section where he tells his own story of how he became a rabbi and later the chief rabbi. And this idea that I don't know if thoughts or things came to you, to me, there's no life without a task, no person without a talent, no place without a fragment of God's light waiting to be discovered and redeemed, no situation without possibility of becoming holy, no moment without its call. That we can always take action. And even if we should have done something 5 minutes ago and didn't, or 5 days ago and didn't, right? That we can still take action today. Maybe it's a different action that we have to take, but we can still take action today.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
His thought is progressive. He doesn't write in a negative tone throughout his work. Yeah.
Like that. Thanks. I like that's beautiful. Thank you. Other reactions, comments? I want to jump to the last chapter of this book again. You know, this is sort of like a book report on Rabbi Sacks. There's so much to do about him. You know, we could literally just watch a video. He's got so many amazing TED Talks if you're a TED Talk person. He has a really powerful TED Talk. He talked about how to live in face of fear, which I highly recommend, and so many lectures. So I just recommend sort of YouTube, go YouTube Rabbi Sacks or anywhere else, and just spending some time learning with him. So his last chapter in this book is called On Dreams and Responsibilities. And Gina, I'm not going to have you read the whole chapter because that would have taken the whole time, but I'm going to sort of have us read snippets. So let me pull it up, and thank you for reading. So Gina, if you can just start, he starts with this quote, which begins each time.
Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Robert Kennedy. The 21st century confronts humanity with challenges of a scale and scope that seem to defy solution.
I'm going to pause you here, if that's okay, because he's just going to list out, this is 2005's list of sort of all the surahs in the world. Some of them are still the same. Some have changed. So thanks, Gina, for sort of jumping with me. We're going to jump to, you can see at the heart of.
Sure. At the heart of this book has been a metaphor coined in a hilltop village in North Israel in the 16th century by a Jewish mystic in the aftermath of one of the great human tragedies of the Middle Ages, the Spanish expulsion. Rabbi Isaac Luria framed a vision of hope in the midst of catastrophe. The divine light, which initially flooded creation, proved too strong. There was a breaking of the vessels, as a result of which fragments of God's light lay hidden under the rubble and wreckage of disaster. It is our task, he said, to heal or mend the world by searching for those fragments and rescuing them one by one. It was a loving image because it refused to accept the fractures of the world as incurable, but neither did it suppose that repair would be instantaneous, easy, or dramatic. Like the people I've written about, and like Lauren Isley's story of the starfish, Lurianic Kabbalah proposed a redemption of small steps. God does not ask us to save the world entire and alone. On the contrary, the attempt to force the end usually results in violence and disaster. Instead, God asks us to do what we can when we can. We mend the world one life at a time, one act at a time, one day at a time. A single life, said the rabbis, is like a universe. Change a life and you begin to change the world. Every generous deed, each healing word, every embracing gesture brings redemption nearer. Each is a letter we write in the book of life. We can make a difference. It must have seemed absurd at the time to think that the leader of a group of slaves escaping to freedom across a barren wilderness more than 3,000 years ago could deliver a message that would eventually transform the moral landscape of the West. In a later age, a handful of prophets kept the Jewish spirit alive at times of catastrophe and near despair. An even smaller handful of survivors rebuilt Jewish life after the Holocaust, having come eyeball to eyeball with the angel of death. There is not one movement, not one shift in the world's conscience that did not begin with a few individuals daring to think the not yet thought, speak the courageous word, do the different deed. The word impossible did not exist in their vocabulary. It should not exist in ours.
Gina, thank you. I'm going to stop you here. I mean, there's so much. We could literally take this apart sentence by sentence and word for word. And also, we didn't read the meat of the book. We're sort of now getting to a summation. But to me, even just those last couple sentences that you read are really powerful. There's not one moment, not one shift in the world's conscious that did not begin with a few individuals daring to think the not yet thought, speaking the courageous word and doing the different deed. The word impossible did not exist in their vocabulary, and it shouldn't exist in ours. I think, that's something that we need to hear, something that we need to hear every day. And even, we can find so many things that fit into that. And even just hearing today about the vaccine trials, and how, they seem to be defying everything that we believed was possible. Let it be, let it be. But, again, and we can think of so many other ways about this idea that the word impossible doesn't have to exist in our vocabulary, right? I think this goes to what Doc Brahms said, right? Doc Brahms says, right, Rabbi Sacks phrases everything in the positive, right? The word impossible doesn't have to exist in our vocabulary. I keep sort of jumping around, but I'm gonna, Gina, I'll find the spot for you to pick up it. Oh, I missed it. And Gina, if you can see just on the bottom in the Bible, just that paragraph.
In the Bible, when God revealed himself to Abraham, Jacob, and Moses, he began simply by calling them by name. Their response, at once the most primal and profound, was simply to say, Hineni, here I am. Life is God's question. We are his answer. It may be a good answer or a bad one, but it is the only answer there is. God does not need to know or be assured by us that he is God. He needs to know that we hear his call, that we are ready to rise to his challenge, and that we are willing to take into our own hands the responsibility with which he has entrusted us, empowered and given strength by that very trust itself.
And then if you can pause for 1 second, we're gonna jump to many people.
Many people have said it. Everyone can be great, said Martin Luther King, because everyone can serve. Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile, said Albert Einstein. He who wishes to secure the good of others has already secured his own, said Confucius. And Edmund Burke, nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little. And perhaps most beautifully, Isaiah, in words that Jews have read for almost 2,000 years on the Sabbath of consolation after the day we mourn the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The paradox of altruism is that the hope we give others returns to us undiminished and enlarged. Perhaps faith is only created in the doing, happiness in the giving, and meaning in the courage to take risks for the sake of an ideal. All I know is that the greatest achievement in life is to have been, for one other person, even for one moment, an agent of hope.
Pause here for a second. Again, a really powerful message, right? The greatest achievement in life is for one person, for one moment, to be an agent of hope for them. Really powerful, right? And this is not out of our reach, right? This is attainable, right? Again, this is not impossible. A really powerful thing. He goes on, every good act, every healing gesture lights a candle of hope in a dark world, he says. There were times when the gift of a crust of bread or even a smile gave a will to live to someone. A single message of support can tell threatened people that they are not alone. One act of hospitality can redeem a lonely life on the brink of despair. A word of praise can give strength. We never know at the time the ripple of consequences set in motion by the smallest act of kindness. Again, I think this is something that, speaks to everyone, and I think speaks to us today, and even all those around us in this world that we're living in today. I'm gonna sort of go to the end. I'm not gonna have you read, but I recommend it. He has this list. If you can see my screen, I'm gonna find it. He has this list of like his greatest thoughts of everything that he's sort of learned in life. This is as of 2005. Yeah, I spent much of my life thinking about life, observing people, reading books, searching for teachers. I make no claim to wisdom, but this is what I've learned. And he has these bullet points that each of us is here for a purpose. Discerning that purpose takes time and honesty, knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of the world, but it's there to be discovered, right? We have a unique constellation of gifts, unreplicated radius of influence within that radius. Be it as small as a family, as large as a state, we can be transformative. Right? Even the smallest deed can change someone's life. It's not the honors we receive that matter, but the honor that we give. Right? And this beautiful list, which you'll see, goes on and on and on and on and on. And if you're interested, I can send you a copy of it. But Gina, if you'll read, this is his last paragraph of the book. Good represents the reality.
Good represents the reality of which God is the dream, wrote Iris Murdoch. In dreams begin responsibilities, wrote W.B. Yeats. Judaism is the guardian of an ancient but still compelling dream, to heal where others harm, mend where others destroy, to redeem evil by turning its negative energies to good. These are the mark of the ethics of responsibility, born in the radical faith that God calls on us to exercise our freedom by becoming his partners in the work of creation. That seems to me a life-affirming vision, the courage to take the risk of responsibility, becoming co-authors with God of the world that ought to be.
Gina. Comments? And Rabbi Sacks sort of lays it out. He says it's possible, right? We can be partners with God, right? That call is out there. God is calling us. Right? How do we respond? How do we take responsibility for this world? And he says, right, it can be the small things, right? We can affect just something within our small radius, right? We don't have to necessarily affect the country, right? He brought that quote from Robert Kennedy about the ripples that it has. I thought it was really powerful. I want to play for you the last recorded Devar Torah from Rabbi Sacks on last week's portion. But before I do that, any other thoughts or comments?
I just wanted to say that you're teaching a beautiful class. I'm just quite astounded that you're bringing me the awareness that one little act can have such a big ripple effect. It's a very encouraging. I'm just thanking you.
Amen. We'll thank Rabbi Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, but thank you, Shoshana.
Thank you for bringing him to my attention. Thank you.
And I would just say with those kind of words, I could see where you could teach it to young kids. I mean, it's very understandable. It's very relatable for kids and something that's probably good for them to learn. Like every little act can make a difference and is important.
100%. Actually, if you look at his website, he has a whole staff of people working with him. In the last few years, they've created a family version of each of his Divrei Torah. So there's the adult version or the community version that's sent out. And then there's a whole separate web page that has the family version. So it takes the theme, brings it down to children's versions, and it has activities and discussion questions based on it. Yeah, Margie?
Oh, I wasn't raising my hand, but I was just thinking, when David's cousins from London were here 4 years ago, somehow she started talking to me about Rabbi Sacks. And at that time, he was no longer chief rabbi, I don't think, but how much, she's like a super fan, and just how much he meant to everybody, not just the Orthodox community, but she felt the entire British Jewish community and general community is just so respected. And this is why.
He represented Judaism, dignity and respect, and also the fact that we care for everyone in the world, right? Obviously, we care for Jews. He was a role model for all Jews. He lived a traditional Jewish life, but he also, was involved in world politics and world philosophy, right? And engaged in society, called out wrongs, gave his advice for people. Yeah.
But also, I think even with his position, she felt very accessible and approachable. And she said, of course, we're Jews and we're members of this community, and the new chief rabbi is the chief rabbi, but he'll never be Rabbi Sacks.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw an email from a colleague that had spent time in London, a conservative rabbi in London. And he said that the first rabbi to reach out to him when he moved there was Rabbi Sacks, and that he would often have him at his Shabbos table, this young conservative rabbi, and that I think he was preparing for one holiday, Passover or something else, and he was counseling someone in his office, and he got a call, and his assistant put the call through, and it was Rabbi Sacks, just to wish him a good Yontif. And the congregant was so amazed, like Rabbi Sacks would take his time to call, all the rabbis, around town, just to wish them a good Yontif, and to think about them.
Well,
Yes,
and my
Ruth.
daughter, just quickly, sorry, my daughter is a grad student at NYU, and she said until 2 years ago, he was associated with NYU, and she goes to this downtown Minyan, and he used to come and speak at it sometimes. He was very accessible to the young adults and the students there. So she said she's sorry she started right after that and missed him there.
Yeah, he spent about 4 years in America, yeah, in New York and a couple other places. Ruth?
Do you have any brief information how he became a Lord and how was he knighted? Why?
You know what? I don't remember the story. He was here. He spoke at the Fuchs Mizrahi Gala about 5 years ago. Time sort of has a way of getting with you. He told the comical version of the story, though. He didn't tell the real version of the story. So now I have to tell the comical version of the story, which is, the queen is very short and he's fairly tall, right? And he was selected to be knighted. And he had his appearance before the queen. And because he's so tall, they built a little ramp for the queen so that she could get high enough so that she could knight him. And he stood there, ready to be received by the queen. And when the queen walked in, she saw the little ramp and she stepped up and she said to her advisor, she turned to him and said, "Why is this night different from every other night?" Rabbi Sacks told it, so I have to say it in his name. But he was a friend to the royal family. I saw Prince Charles put out a very moving post about his passing. But Ruth, it's a great question. I bet you that will come up in the next couple of days in articles, or we can find that. So I wanted to close with his last of our Torah. Hopefully, this is a funkier website, so hopefully the audio will play. So I'm gonna need to see a nod of heads, but let me share it. And I'll show you, this is his website. So you could just text Rabbi Sacks. It's a really well-run website. And hopefully you can hear. Oh, sorry, push the wrong button.
The early history of humanity as told in the Torah is a series of disappointments. God gives human beings freedom, which they then misuse. Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit. Cain murders Abel. Within a relatively short time, the world before the flood has become dominated by violence. All flesh had perverted its way on the earth. God creates order, man creates chaos. Even after the flood, humanity, in the form of the builders of Babel, is guilty of hubris, thinking they can build a tower whose top reaches heaven. Humans fail to respond to God, which is where Abraham enters the picture. We're not quite sure at the beginning what it is that Abraham was being summoned to. We know that he was commanded to leave his land, birthplace, and father's house, and travel to the land which I will show you. But what he was to do there, we don't know. On this, the Torah is silent. What was Abraham's mission? What made him special? What made him not simply a good man in a bad age, as was Noah, but a leader and the father of a nation of leaders?
Can you shake your head if you can hear it? He actually usually talks very slow. This is very fast for him. You may know, sorry, I'm just stopping it for a second. It was announced about 3 weeks ago that he was diagnosed with cancer and was going through some significant treatments for his cancer. So he must have recorded this at a time when he was not so well. So just sort of that as a backdrop and continuing.
To decode the mystery, we have to recall what the Torah has been signaling prior to this point. I suggested in previous essays that perhaps the theme of the Torah is a failure of responsibility. Adam and Eve lacked personal responsibility. Adam said, "It wasn't me, it was the woman." Eve said, "It wasn't me, it was the serpent." It is as if they were denying being the author of their own acts, as if they didn't understand either freedom or the responsibility it entails. Cain didn't deny personal responsibility. He didn't say, "It wasn't me, it was Abel's fault for provoking me." That he didn't say. Instead, he denied moral responsibility. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Noah failed the test of collective responsibility. He was a man of virtue in an age of vice, but he made no impact on his contemporaries. He saved his family and the animals, but no one else. According to the plain reading of the text, he didn't even try. Understand all of this, and we understand Abraham. Abraham exercised personal responsibility. For instance, a quarrel breaks out between his herdsmen and those of his nephew Lot. Seeing that this was no random occurrence but the result of their having too many cattle to be able to graze together, Abraham immediately proposed a solution. Abraham said to Lot, "Let there not be a quarrel between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are brothers. Isn't the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Note that Abraham passed no judgment. He didn't ask whose fault the argument was. He didn't ask who will gain from any particular outcome. He gave Lot the choice. He saw the problem and he acted. He took responsibility. In the next chapter, we're told about a local war, as a result of which Lot was among the people taken captive. Immediately, Abraham gathered a force, pursued the invaders, rescued Lot, and with him all the other captives, whom he returned safely to their homes, refusing to take any of the spoils of victory that he was offered by the grateful king of Sodom. This is a strange passage. It isn't the image of Abraham the nomadic shepherd we see elsewhere. It's Abraham willing to fight a battle. Its presence is best understood in the context of the story of Cain. What Abraham shows is that he is his brother's, or rather his brother's son's, keeper. He immediately understands the nature of moral responsibility, despite the fact that Lot had chosen to live where he did, with its attendant risks. Abraham didn't say his safety is his responsibility, not mine. Abraham took moral responsibility. Then, in this week's parasha, comes the great moment in which, for the first time, a human being challenges God himself. God is about to pass judgment on Sodom. Abraham, fearing that this would mean that the city would be destroyed, says with astonishing words, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Ha-shofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice?" This is a remarkable speech. By what right does a mere mortal challenge God himself? The short answer is that God himself signaled to Abraham that he should. Listen carefully to the text immediately before the one I've just read. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will be blessed through him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they've done is as bad as the outcry which has reached me. If not, I will know. Those words, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, are a clear hint that God wants Abraham to respond. Otherwise, why would he have said them? The story of Abraham can only be understood against the backdrop of the story of Noah. There too, God told Noah in advance that he was about to bring punishment to the world. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. Noah did not protest. To the contrary, we're told by the Torah 3 times that Noah did as God commanded him. Noah accepted the verdict. Abraham challenged it. Abraham understood the third principle, collective responsibility. The people of Sodom weren't his brothers or sisters, so he was going beyond what he did when he rescued Lot. He prayed on their behalf because he understood the idea of human solidarity, immortally expressed by John Donne. No man is an island, entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. But a question remains. Why did God call on Abraham to challenge him? Was there anything Abraham knew that God didn't know? The idea is absurd. The answer is surely this. Abraham was to become the role model and initiator of a new faith, one that wouldn't defend the human status quo but challenge it. Abraham had to have the courage to challenge God if his descendants were to have the courage to challenge human rulers, as Moses and the prophets did. Jews didn't accept the world that is. They don't, even now. They challenge it in the name of the world that ought to be. That was a critical turning point in human history, the birth of the world's first religion of protest, a faith that challenges the world instead of accepting it. Abraham wasn't a conventional leader. He didn't rule a nation. There was, as yet, no nation for him to lead. But he was the role model of leadership as Judaism understands it. He took responsibility. He acted. He didn't wait for others to act. Of Noah, the Torah said he walked with God. But to Abraham, God himself said, Hitalech lefanai, walk on ahead of me, meaning be a leader. Walk ahead. Take personal responsibility. Take moral responsibility. Take collective responsibility. Judaism is God's call to responsibility.
Well, thank you for learning with me. May Rabbi Sacks' name, his teachings, his lessons live on. May they always be remembered and be taught. And I look forward to studying more of Rabbi Sacks with you. I'm very sorry that he is gone, but thankfully I have all the writings, and we have all those recordings. May his name always bring blessings. Thanks for studying with me this week, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye-bye.